Oh yes, Denver, Colorado. We are back again. And this place is really pretty, I'm not gonna lie. It's a really pretty city. I like a lot of the newer building designs that they've chosen. I really like the look and feel of the city. That is, until you see all the homeless camps that lie in the shadows of all these brand new fancy buildings. But you know what? This is what many of the major cities out west look like nowadays. Head to Las Vegas. I was there not that long ago this year. We all know about the situation in Portland. We know about San Francisco. We know about Los Angeles. Even Phoenix has a pretty bad homeless problem. Head further south to Albuquerque. Not a very big city there, but Albuquerque is another place that has just been plagued with a homeless problem. But this is going to be my second video in my Denver series of about 28 videos, where I check out every neighborhood in the Mile High City. Now, before we start things off on this video of 5 points, as that's the neighborhood that we're in for this video, there are 5 points that I want to make. Yeah, not really actually, but your residents do have a message for you, Denver. I'm just saying. I'm not the one that put that there for the video. No, that was there. Someone who lives here did that. So, yeah, you better step on it, Denver. You better fix your problems. People are fed up. Actually, I think they were just saying that about the car wash. Yeah, that's probably all it was. But it's also true that a lot of the residents have become fed up with the Mile High City. I'm seeing it in the comments on the videos that I've made of Denver so far. So you can see how I was easily confused there. All right, well, moving on now. For this video, we invade one of Denver's oldest neighborhoods, and along the way, I'll talk about a few major points, such as the homelessness that plagues the western portion of this district. There's also a separate district that has developed over the last 20 years in the far northern portion of the 5 Points neighborhood, so we'll talk about that. And the neighborhood has a strong cultural history that we'll get into, so yeah, this will be an action-packed video, people. Lots to talk about here. First, I wanted to talk about how, in today's Denver, there's a large homeless population. Most of you who are watching this video probably saw my shorter 12-minute video on the subject that I uploaded about a month ago, but even though you can find homelessness here and there throughout the entire city, and even though you can find it in some of the suburban cities like Aurora as well, the truth is that the majority of the homelessness in the Mile High City happens to be situated in downtown and in the neighborhoods that surround downtown. Neighborhoods such as 5 Points. And when I first came through back in July of 22, there was a large homeless encampment centered around Arkins Court and 29th Street. And by coincidence, this tent city that I'm talking about lied in the shadows of a handful of newer and luxurious-looking residential buildings. In fact, we're actually at the spot that I was explaining right now. Well, now that we're here, you can see a large empty property behind a row of cars and tents. Let's switch to an aerial view. You can see that Arkins Court was lined with the same tent city that we're about to continue seeing in this video, but in the middle is a large empty block. Well, today, it's actually a construction site. That's right, on October 4th of 23, they broke ground on this large vacant property, and what they're building here is going to be the DeNargo Market. This is going to be a fairly large complex. Larger than Denver Nuggets star Nikola Jokic. Don't ask me how that's possible, because I didn't know that that was possible, that anything could be larger than Nikola Jokic, you know, with his 6'11", 280-pound frame, 7 foot 3-inch wingspan. Yeah, not sure how anything could be larger than that. But the DeNargo Market is indeed going to be larger. The ones in charge of the project have several claims, including that there will be 3 million square feet of indoor space, which surpasses that of Denver's tallest building, the Republic Plaza. It is also claimed that there will be 4 acres of public green space on the property. Lastly, they say that this project cost about $1.5 billion, and it will be the largest downtown infill investment in the history of the city of Denver. But yeah, anyway, if you were to come and visit this specific area today, it would look totally different. When I came through, ground had yet to be broken on the Denargo market, and it looked like this. Tent after tent after tent after car home after car home after car home. And even though there isn't this massive tent city here anymore, there's still plenty of homeless that roam the streets around here, because right next to the side of the Denargo market construction, you have the Salvation Army homeless shelter. I also couldn't help but notice this in an article that covered the Denargo market groundbreaking from the Denverite, as a U.S. Marshal handcuffed a woman outside of the homeless shelter just a few days before the ground was broken. So as long as the homeless shelter is there, homeless are probably going to be frequenting this area. Anyway, the article didn't say exactly what this woman did who got handcuffed, but if most were to guess, she was probably on drugs or was probably bothering someone, or maybe she was refusing to get out of the way of a construction crew, or who knows. But unfortunately, homeless people are everywhere in the downtown and Five Points area of Denver, as that's where the city's resources are for that crowd. Well, a month after I saw this tent city over by Arkins Court and 29th Street, I came back to Denver only to see that it was all cleared out. So as you can see here, it is now August of 2022 in comparison to before when it was July of 2022. But construction crews at this point had put up temporary fences around the sides of the street where the tents and cars were parked only a month prior. Even with the massive clear out, you can still see some homelessness here, but honestly, it's just sad to see that so many people are selling their lives to abusing drugs. Now, I'm not saying that all of the homeless people are on drugs, and I know that some of you in the comments section will blast me and try to cancel me regardless of what I say on any subject, even though I'm clarifying that I'm not saying that every homeless person here is on drugs, and that's okay. You can go ahead and blast me. But anyway, it's common knowledge that a large portion of the homeless population is on drugs, and that's the main reason as to why they're living off of the streets. If we didn't have the opioid crisis in this country to the level that we have it today, I think that most of us could agree that the homeless situation in this country wouldn't be what it is today. Not even close. Both Colorado and Washington State were the first to legalize marijuana back in 2012. And around here in Colorado, a lot of longtime locals blame that for being the reason for the drastic negative changes that Denver has seen. Their argument is backed up by the data, as today, Colorado sees the 5th highest rate of drug abuse out of all of the states. Well, 4th highest if you don't count DC. And of course, that's according to Wallet Hub. Well, the year 2020 did a number on this state too, but that's true for every state in this country. Now, I do believe that there are some homeless who have just had bad luck in life and they have nowhere to go. Or maybe they come from a chaotic household and it was darn near impossible for them to succeed the right way during their upbringing in school. You know, everyone has their own story. I do believe that there is a portion of the homeless population that doesn't abuse drugs. They just simply can't afford a place to live, and they can't make the income required to get a lease on an apartment or a mortgage on a place. But in the same breath, I do believe that a large portion of the homeless population is on drugs and they do not work, but that's because they're drug addicts, and it's a very sad thing to see. You know, not to mention the amount of veterans who fought for this country who ended up abusing drugs because of the physical pain that they received from serving for our country. That's another very unfortunate reality that we're dealing with here. You know, everyone has their own story. There's not one headline or label that you can put on everyone to explain how the number in homelessness has gotten to be so high in Denver. Both society overall and the media is lazy when it comes to labeling different groups of people, whether it's homeless people, whether it's people in poverty. It's not as simple as just putting a label on a certain demographic and that explaining the situation that's going on. Everyone has their own story. Everybody needs to be heard. And in my opinion, I think that the best solution to this problem with homelessness in this country is to make mental health more accessible. I don't think that just giving these homeless people money is going to make that big of a difference. For most of them, I think that some of them would be able to put it towards the right type of thing to improve their lives. But I think that most people, if you just hand them money, they're just going to spend it right away, whether it's on food, whether it's on clothes. And these are things that they need. And let's be honest, some of them are going to spend it on buying more drugs. But the problem is that if you give them money, they're going to spend it right away, and then they're going to need more of it. Whereas if you can improve mental health, that is just so much more valuable to get the head going in the right way, to put yourself down the right path. That's just what I think. And I think that if mental health became more accessible to a larger portion of this population, whether it's people who are in poverty who need it the most, or whether it's people out on the streets not living in a home that need it the most, I think that we could see some drastic changes if it's done properly. But I have a hard time believing that mental health is going to be more accessible to all population bases in this country throughout my lifetime. I just don't believe it's going to happen. Well, lastly, before we move on to other talking points about the 5 Points neighborhood, you also have to feel bad for the small business owners in the downtown Denver area, right? Because these are people who have gone about life the right way, but they're being forced to maybe close up shop because nobody wants to go to their shop anymore when a tent city is right in front of their entrance. If you go around the Denver metro area and just talk to random people about the current state of downtown Denver, yeah, you're going to quickly find out that many people who would have gone to downtown Denver 10 to 15 years ago on a regular basis won't do so anymore, and they'll say it's mostly because of the homeless population and the crime that comes with it. Anyway, if you do a quick search on the relationship between the homeless and small business owners in downtown Denver, you'll find plenty of stories of the small business owners going through a tough time because they don't have the customer base that they once did. And if this continues, if we continue to see a rise in homeless people in downtown Denver and the problem never gets solved, you can bet that you're going to start seeing more boarded up homes like this one throughout the city, which will ultimately mean lower property values and the loss of tax revenue due to residents and businesses moving out of the city proper. Alright, so now we're going to transition to other talking points, as there's more than just homelessness and crime to mention about the 5 Points neighborhood. With Denver's population growth from 1990-ish to 2020-ish, there's been a large increase in hippies in the area, and that's created a demand for arts and culture, which isn't a bad thing, but that's basically how the RiNo Art District came to be. 30 years ago, the RiNo Art District was never a thing. This district, along with the equally hipster Lower Downtown District to the west that I covered in my Downtown Denver video, used to all be a large industrial warehouse area full of blighted industrial buildings and brownfields. But as you can see, today, this area doesn't at all look like an old industrial area of town. It's not blighted, it's not empty, and because of the demands for development in this area, there aren't any brownfields left. This is Brighton Boulevard, which is one of the main thoroughfares through the district, and you can see that it's full of newer apartment buildings and condos that were brought up with Denver's recent population boom. Well, let's talk about how the RiNo District came to be. In the 1990s, what is known today as the RiNo District was all just a part of the larger 5 Points neighborhood. Some people called it River North, but not really, according to a site called Confluence Denver. Well, slowly but surely, the district that was once full of abandoned warehouses and empty buildings and brownfields started to slowly transform into being a trendy tech hub. In the 90s, hipsters gathered around and turned some of the older buildings into creative workspaces, and that's when the beginning stages of what was going to be the RiNo District took place. Well, here's a 93 satellite view of the River North District. You can see the construction of Coors Field in the far bottom left corner, which broke ground in 92 and opened in 95. Northeast of Coors Field, you can see a long stretch of railroad tracks, and that's where the train yard used to be. And it looks like when the satellite photo was taken, that the city was in the middle of tearing up the giant train yard. One other spot that I wanted to point out is the old yellow cab taxi depot, which was here, sandwiched between the South Platte River and another pair of railroad tracks. I'll explain more of what happened there later in the video. Anyway, now, look at this area right here, just north of Coors Field. It looks like in 93 there were a bunch of old warehouses, but here we're going to fast forward to a shot of today, and you can really see the impact of the real estate developments that have taken place here over the last 30-year stretch. Now, more on the Yellow Cab Taxi Depot, as that was the first successful turnaround project in this area, and it started in 2001. That year, a successful Denver area businessman named Mickey Zeppelin purchased the old abandoned Yellow Cab Taxi Depot and turned it into a large mixed-use complex. Zeppelin owns Zeppelin Development, which is a real estate development company, and through that, he has made several real estate investments in and around the downtown Denver area. Anyway, the name of the development on the site of the old Yellow Cab Depot is the Taxi Campus. Today, it's home to over 100 full-time residents and 110 businesses among 9 different buildings. Before it's too late, I also wanted to mention that a big part of the identity for the RiNo Art District is graffiti, or art displays, on the sides of the buildings. I mean, tell me that a district or a neighborhood of a city is hipster without actually telling me that it's hipster. Well, we're starting to see some of it now. Other streets, such as Blake and Larimer, are caked with a lot more of this than Brighton Boulevard is, and we'll go down those streets later in the video. But yes, the RiNo Art District, along with lower downtown to the west of it, was full of empty buildings and old industrial junkyards up until around 2001. And around that time, around 2001, the demand for residential and commercial office space took off in downtown Denver, and things look completely different today in both the RiNo Art District and lower downtown than they did about 30 years ago. From 2000 to 2005, there were several tech startups in what became the RiNo Art District, and it was officially called as such in 2005. Since 2005, real estate developers including Zeppelin have gobbled up all of the land, and today there's very little space left that's available to develop, as luxury condos and apartments make up most of the residential inventory in this area. So we're now starting to see a lot more of the art within the RiNo Art District. Now, I know that graffiti is all a part of the identity of this neighborhood, and I know that it's supposed to add character and a sense of creativity, and I really do like some of the murals on some of the buildings, and I think that some of the graffiti looks cool too, but I can't help but admit that some of this graffiti that we're going to continue seeing throughout the RiNo Art District just looks really trashy. Yeah, some of these displays aren't going to win any awards. And really, a part of me wishes that Simon Cowell would stop by and just rip on some of these art displays to shreds. You know, maybe that would filter out some of the bad art that we see here. But yeah, at least some of it is really cool looking. Anyway, we're currently right behind the Blue Moon Brewery, which is just a few blocks away from some of the newer and fancy residential buildings, and there seems to be a couple of really nice breweries right here to check out on a Friday night. That is, if you can dodge the nocturnal sketchy characters that roam around here. Now, according to Apartment List, renting a place in the RiNo District will cost you anywhere from $1,550 to $4,800. And after a deep dive into some of the listings around here, it looks like you can get a 1-bedroom and 1-bathroom 800 square foot apartment for $1,400. Really, that's not a terrible price. Look around this country, look in the urban areas around this country, and tell me that $1,400 for an 800 square foot apartment in a trendy, hipster area of a large city that is a tech hub isn't a good deal. That's actually a pretty good deal. It's expensive still, but in today's real estate market, that's not that bad. I'm just saying, there's a lot of places out there that are a lot more expensive than that. $1,400 for, heck, a 500 square foot space would be a dream in some parts of this country. So yeah, it's a little bit expensive, but it's not the worst. So if you are a young professional city snob and you just happen to get a tech job in downtown Denver or whatever, and you really dig this RiNo Art District, you might as well go for it, right? $1,400, 800 square feet, you don't need much more than that if you just graduated college. However, that being said, it seems as if there's a lot of people who feel as if the RiNo Art District doesn't live up to the hype. we're going to check out what people are saying about the RiNo Art District from around the internet. Because we all know that the urban dictionaries and the Reddit forums of the world are the absolute most credible sources of information. Keep in mind that these aren't my words. We're going to read off the opinions from people who, allegedly, know the area really well. Alright, so let's get with it, shall we? Same Grass But Greener asks for people's opinions and thoughts on the RiNo Art District. This person says that they want to get an apartment there, but a friend told this person that she felt like it was a sketchy place to live, so who better to ask than a Reddit board, right? Well, Economy Cup 4337 immediately responds with mentioning just how badly Denver's homeless population has grown, with 3 upvotes there. Now, this thread has only been up on Reddit for about 6 months at the time of me uploading this video, so it's a fairly young thread. Well, another response was made by Mothership Convection. Long story short, that poster basically said that the RiNo Art District had nothing to do past the breweries and that they had lived in Denver for the past few years. This person mentions again the homeless problem, with stating how the sidewalks in the neighborhood are blocked off by tent cities often, and how the sidewalks are also scattered with dirty needles. This person lived in a few places in Denver, it looks like, one place being right in the middle of downtown, and another place about 10 to 15 minutes outside from downtown. But Mothership Convection does not recommend living anywhere in or near downtown Denver to anyone based on their experience. 3 upvotes for that response. Next, we're going to hear from someone named Cajun Swamp Witch. Sounds like she's from Louisiana. Well, Cajun Swamp Witch responds by saying that Westminster, Boulder, Broomfield, Thornton, and Golden are all better places to live. She's lived there since 1999, almost 30 years, and not many quote-unquote locals live in downtown, once again saying that there are so many homeless people and that Denver is beginning to look like Portland and Oakland. She says to look outside of the city limits for a place to live. 2 upvotes for Cajun Swamp Witch's response. Time for one more, as ENG Rocketman says that RiNo is downtown. Don't get it twisted. And this person says that it's a great location to be in the middle of the action, especially if you're young, finishing by saying that it's about as sketchy as any large city's downtown. 3 upvotes for that response. So it seems as if there's a small crowd that really digs the RiNo Art District, whereas most people would rather stay away due to the high homeless population and the crime that occurs in the areas that surround downtown Denver these days. Take that as you will. Moving on now, as we're going to continue to cruise around the RiNo Art District for the next several minutes. We just drove down Blake Street, and we're going to drive down Walnut Street, and we're going to drive down as much of Larimer Street as we can. It was closed off for construction in a couple of blocks when I was in the neighborhood, so we'll see as much of it as possible. And once we're done cruising around RiNo, we'll talk about even more history with the 5 Points neighborhood, as there's actually some strong cultural history to get into, so stay tuned for all of that. Alright, so now we're pretty much out of the RiNo Art District and we'll be staying out of it for the rest of this video. That being said, I'll now start talking about the history of the 5 Points neighborhood. 5 Points was the first neighborhood in Denver to grow outside of the original Denver city limits. The name of 5 Points first started to be used on maps in the 1860s, with the name coming from the reference of where the diagonal street grid in downtown Denver met the rectangular street grid at the intersection of Washington, Welton, 26th Avenue, and 27th Street. In the 1880s, the name became official when the Stout Street Herdick Coach streetcar line used the name of 5 Points as a designation. At the time, some people didn't like the name of 5 Points, as it was the same name that was used for an infamous New York City neighborhood that was known for its slums. But the name of 5 Points stuck, and the Denver neighborhood has been called that from the beginning. After the urban railroad connected 5 Points with the rest of Denver, the 5 Points neighborhood started to rapidly grow. In 1868, Curtis Park was established, which was Denver's first public park. In fact, there's a small district within 5 Points called the Curtis Park Historic District, which is labeled as Denver's first streetcar suburb. Obviously, it's not a suburb anymore, but back then it was. From 1860 to the silver crash of 1893, Denver was by far and away the fastest growing city in the country. The population grew from 4,700 in 1860 to just over 100,000 by 1890, and during that time, the 5 Points neighborhood grew extremely quickly. The development in 5 Points saw a mixture of commercial, industrial, and residential use as it grew, and almost right away, 5 Points became a hotspot for African Americans. In 1865, the Zion Baptist Church was built at the corner of 24th Avenue and Ogden Street, and it still stands there today as Colorado's oldest African American congregation. By 1920, 5 Points became the center point for Denver's black community, as 90% of Denver's black residents lived in either 5 Points or the neighborhood just east of here, which is Whittier. By this time, most of the upper-class whites that used to live in 5 Points had relocated to the Capitol Hill neighborhood. There was even a precinct along 22nd Street that was called the Deep South due to the amount of railroad workers that moved to Denver from that region of the country. I'm just going to keep stealing photos from the Denver Library's digital archive here because these are some great photos, but this one was taken at a place called Rice's Tap Room and Oven. Well, over time, 5 Points earned the nickname of Harlem of the West. Not to mention there was a large jazz music scene here throughout the first half of the 20th century. By 1950, there were as many as 13,500 African Americans who called 5 Points home. The Rossonian Hotel at the corner of Welton, Washington, 26th Avenue, and 27th Street was the hotel that black jazz artists would typically stay at when coming to Denver to perform, as most other hotels in the area were white-owned and would decline them as a guest. Some of the more well-known artists to have stayed at the Rossonian include Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and Nat King Cole, which is pretty neat. Now, shamefully, I didn't drive past the Rossonian Hotel, where there's a couple of blocks along Welton Street, in which the buildings here are a part of the Welton Street Cultural Historic District. Putting a historic label on these buildings basically protects them from being demolished, and I like it because this entire area of Denver has been seeing redevelopments over the last 30 years, and there have been many older buildings within 5 Points that have been demoed over the years. So yeah, it's nice to keep a collection of historic commercial buildings for at least a few blocks, especially a building such as the Rossonian Hotel. Well, the 5 Points neighborhood wasn't just strictly black, as there was a decent amount of people from other cultures too, such as white, Korean, Japanese, and Latino. In 1957, however, Denver passed the Fair Housing Act. Several years later, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. So starting in the 1960s, 5 Points saw its first decline as newer housing laws came into effect, allowing black residents to have the same rights as white families when it comes to buying a home. So from 1950 to 1970, the Five Points neighborhood lost half of its residents as the wealthier black people moved, along with the wealthier people from the other ethnicities, whereas the less fortunate of all ethnicities were forced to stay since they couldn't afford to move out of Five Points. Many of the longtime businesses in Five Points were forced to close due to fewer people living in the neighborhood, including the Rossonian Lounge and Hotel. During this long phase of decline, the Five Points neighborhood went from being home to 25,000 people in 1950 to only around 8,000 40 years later in 1990, in which at that point about 40% of the population in Five Points was Latino. Well, as I mentioned a second ago, many of the buildings that were original to Five Points didn't survive the 40-year stretch of decline, as many of them were torn down for either parking lots or some sort of urban renewal project. Crime was high during this time as well, making the Five Points neighborhood even more undesirable to live or do business in. One of the significant buildings that was able to survive Five Points' long and dreary decline, was a house. Not just any house, but a house that was owned by Justina Ford, who was the first licensed African-American female doctor in Denver. Well, she had a home that was originally constructed in 1890, and it was located at 2335 Arapahoe Street. In 1984, however, it was moved 13 blocks away to its current location at California and 31st Streets, where it now serves as the Black American West Museum. Well, around 1990, the Five Points neighborhood started to rebound. It benefited from the rapid spike in residential and commercial demand that centered around downtown Denver. Redevelopments took shape throughout Five Points, and in 1995, efforts were made to save the Rossonian Hotel, and they were able to place it on the National Register of Historic Places that year. So, once again, not many of the historic buildings in Five Points were able to be saved, but they were able to save one of the more historic buildings in the Five Points neighborhood, so that's all good and dandy. Well, today it's really expensive to live here in the Five Points neighborhood of Denver, as downtown is flooded with all of these newer luxury condos and apartments. Naturally, that's going to raise the values of all of the property, commercial and residential, nearby. And that includes the single-family housing in Five Points, along with the condos and apartments in Five Points. Plus, you have the large homeless population too nearby and the crime that comes with that. Also, the residential makeup shows that white is the largest demographic among its current residents, despite the strong black history. So that's how things have changed in the Five Points neighborhood over the years. Well, it is now that time. You can't always trust an urban renewal project, and you can't always trust a Reddit comment, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. We're going to do things a little bit different this time around, and every time around that we do a neighborhood of a larger city with a series of videos for said larger city, most of this Chris livability score ranking system will be the same, but for these neighborhood scores, I eliminate the downtown ranking category, as obviously these neighborhoods downtown is the one of the city that they belong to. So that's just kind of irrelevant. And also towards the end, I'll only be measuring up 5 points with other Denver neighborhoods instead of all of the cities that I've been through since starting the Chris livability score earlier this year. Alright, so let's begin. The first category is education. Manual High School is just east of here in the Whittier neighborhood, and it's among the worst performing high schools in Denver. However, there's a school within 5 points called University Prep, and it fares a lot better than Manual High School does. The schools here aren't great, but they're not the worst. Education gets a 10 out of 20. Crime in 5 points is definitely something to be concerned about. The homeless crowd here is only growing bigger, and sadly, but unfortunately true, you never know what the mental state will be of whoever it is that you're crossing if they're among that crowd of people. So you kind of have to watch your back when it comes to that. The property crime rate in 5 Points is 2 times higher than the national average rate, and the violent crime rate is too. It's not as bad as downtown, but it's close. Crime gets a 6 out of 20. Next is the economy, and there's money in the 5 Points neighborhood. Obviously, as we're continuing to see all of these expensive new condos rise up from the brownfield sites in the RiNo Art District. There's obviously a market here for higher-end living, but it just so happens to be where many of the homeless have settled in. The Denver economy, however, is really strong when compared to other large metro areas in the US. Economy gets a 15 out of 20. Recreational opportunities is next, and the 5 Points neighborhood is very pedestrian-friendly. You also have City Park just east of here, which includes the Denver Zoo, and on the north end of the neighborhood you have a pedestrian trail that follows the South Platte River. So for an urban setting, recreational opportunities gets a 13 out of 20. Next up is history, and the 5 Points neighborhood might have more history than any other neighborhood in Denver outside of the Central Business District. I thought that it was really neat to learn about the jazz artists and how big the jazz scene was along Welton Street back in the day. History gets a 13 out of 20. Next up is amenities, and downtown is right next to 5 Points. So there are plenty of things to check out and explore in and around the 5 Points neighborhood. You have Coors Field technically within the bounds of 5 Points, whereas other sports stadiums are on the opposite end of downtown. There are plenty of restaurants to check out too, so it would be hard to get bored of the same ones. The only thing that I would like to see around here different would be a few more grocery stores. Amenities gets an 18 out of 20. Lastly, we have the cost of living, and the homes here are really expensive, whether it's buying or renting. A look on Zillow shows that there are many living spaces here that are listed for over $1 million. I see one that's even listed for $3 million. Yeah, no thanks. The cheaper options are listed around $500K with only a few listings below the $400,000 mark. Cost of living gets a 5 out of 20. All in all, the Chris Livability score for the 5 Points neighborhood is 80 out of 140, putting it in second place out of the Denver neighborhoods that I've done this for so far. Final thoughts here, as in my honest opinion about when it comes to the thought of living in 5 Points, yeah, I wouldn't want to live here, but that's just me. For me, there's too many homeless, there would be too much paranoia over the possibility of someone breaking into my car while I'm asleep at night, it's too expensive for what you get, and in the Denver metro area there are just much better options when you look in the suburbs. The only benefit to living in 5 Points these days would be if you're a true hipster, if you're a young single, or if you work in downtown, as living in 5 Points would eliminate a long commute. Some people get depressed out in the suburbs, but I'm not one of those people. The suburbs in most cases, when it comes to large cities in this country, offer the best quality of life, and oftentimes, it's not even close. I feel like I'm naturally a city person, but unfortunately, not only Denver, but a lot of the major cities in the country are either falling apart currently, or they have been falling apart for seemingly a century. 5 Points is cool. It has some neat history and everything, but it's just not among the best places to live in the Denver area these days. It's just not. With that said, I do end the video here. And I continue to drive around 5 Points past this point, so if you want to see more of what the 5 Points neighborhood looks like, you can check out all of my extra video footage on 5 Points through an upload that I'll have on my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives, and once that video is uploaded, the link for it will be down below. Well, if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy checking out some of the featured playlists on this channel. Videos with amazing insights on other places like what you saw here can be found in my Denver playlist or in my Colorado playlist. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace.